Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the best place for the best takes. I'm Benjamin Cure. This is the Benjamin Cure Show. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for making us a part of your week and choosing this show. I know there's not a lot of time in people's days, so I really do appreciate you guys with so many choices out there tuning into the show today. And because of that, I'm going to get right to it because we've got a great show, great interview, great topics on today's show. And the biggest story that I'm going to start with actually came through the newswire last night. Odell Beckham Jr. signed a 1-year, $15 million base salary deal with the Ravens. He has incentives that'll take him up to $18 million for the season, and everyone is talking about what this means for the Ravens. Are they building a great organization and a great team in the second half of this free agency cycle? And to me, I saw the screenshot of the FaceTime call between Lamar Jackson and Odell Beckham Jr. And I understand that it might be an exciting time for Ravens fans or for those who are rooting for Lamar Jackson, but certain keys still have not changed. Lamar Jackson still does not have an agent. That means that he is representing himself. He is going to stick to his guns. He's going to want to get the number that he wants, the contract that he wants, that he believes he deserves. And rightfully so, he is negotiating for himself and he can demand whatever he wants. But that has not worked out in his favor. Last week on the Pat McAfee show, Drew Rosenhaus was on as a special guest. And he made a great pitch to Lamar Jackson saying, I'll represent you. My fee is negotiable. I know all 32 GMs. I know all 32 owners. I feel that I can get you a great deal with the Ravens, something that both of you will like. And I also believe that, worst case scenario, we can shop you and we can get you out of there to a different team that you want to be a part of. And Lamar Jackson, a week later, did not respond to that offer. And I thought it was a very compelling one. I think, I've met Drew Rosenhaus before. Seems like an awesome guy to have on your side. And I just don't know how Lamar Jackson wouldn't have accepted that olive branch that Drew Rosenhaus extended to him. And because of that, because the most important things haven't changed. Lamar still not having representation beyond his own home and just not willing to bend on his number, which I understand. The Ravens aren't going to concede here either. The organization rarely does in these circumstances. So bringing in Odell, having a new offensive coordinator, sure, that's an exciting time for a very well-run Baltimore Ravens franchise, but to me, it's not enough. And it's not a guarantee that Lamar Jackson is coming back. And Lamar is going to stick to his number. He is going to stick to probably the fully guaranteed 230 that we think he's looking for to beat out Deshaun Watson or at least match him. And he has every right to do that, but it's without representation, he's not going to get that. The league, the NFL, does not favor independent contractors. It is a business, and they like to do things their way. That's why there's NFLPA certified agents and select guys that do business with some of the biggest franchises in the world because they know how the ship is run. And Lamar Jackson's unfamiliarness with those circumstances and not knowing how to, kind of navigate that territory, it's the reason why he doesn't have a contract right now. And unless something changes where he decides that, representation outside of my own household, outside of myself, beyond my mom, when he decides that he can look beyond that, he'll get an agent and things will start moving. But until then, Ravens aren't going to concede. Lamar is not going to concede. This Odell Beckham Jr. deal does not bring the Ravens or Lamar Jackson any closer to making a deal than they were a month ago. It's not what everybody is painting it out to be. This is still the same key, the same key people are in place, the same circumstances, no representation, people taking things personally in business. It's getting ugly, and I do not think this Odell Beckham Jr. deal brings them any closer to re-signing Lamar Jackson. So this next take is going to make a lot of hardcore NBA fans very upset. I know it for a fact because it goes against the grain, and I understand why some basketball purists may not like this because it's going up against a big star in the NBA right now. So let me cut out the preamble and let me just get to it. Over the weekend, the Dallas Mavericks were eliminated from playoff contention. They will not compete against some of the better Western Conference teams in a postseason series. They will not get to play or compete in the play-in. Their season is over. They're going home. And immediately after that became their reality, I took to social media, and I saw a lot of other fans did too. And there was so much blame being put out there against Kyrie Irving, and everybody saying, Kyrie Irving ruins everything he touches. See, this is what we were talking about. It wasn't going to work. And they were talking about how he blew up the locker room. He ruined their chemistry. And I laughed to myself. I did think, for the most part, I'll be honest here, you guys have watched the show, I was leaning towards the fact that this situation in Dallas would work with Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic. But I did cite a stat that I think is so important, that is so overlooked, and I ended up being right, and I should have stuck to my guns on this. Ball usage percentage. When there's two guys on a team with over 30% or 30% and 25% of ball usage percentage, it's a problem because there's not enough of a ball to go around for these stars. You're not going to ask Kyrie Irving to play off ball. As a matter of fact, even if you do ask him, he's not going to do it. That is his playing style. Luka, you're certainly not going to ask him to do it, and I don't think he would either, because in the NBA, pride and ego shines through a little bit more than in other leagues. These players have every right to deny any coaching changes or scheme changes that they want to. So, a lot of blame going towards Kyrie Irving. And I don't think people are blaming the right person. And this one is I know that this is going to shock a lot of people, but what if I told you that Luka Doncic was the problem? What if I asked you, is Luka Doncic the problem? And this is something to look out for moving forward, because not enough people are talking about it. An MVP hopeful, a great player, one of the best get-a-bucket guys in the league. No one wants to go against Luka Doncic. But I'm not doing this for a hot take. I'm doing this because I see the writing on the wall. And whenever I do that, I tend to be right, whether it's in a month, in a year, or in 2 years. And this is something to look out for. Luka Doncic's previous teammates include Jalen Brunson, Tim Hardaway Jr., Seth Curry, Kristaps Porzingis, Kyrie Irving, JJ Redick, and Boban. Not all NBA title superstars, but certainly a list of formidable players, right? We can agree on that. Those guys and all that help for Luka have resulted in a dozen playoff wins since he's been in the league. I know people are going to say, well, they went to the Western Conference Finals last year. They did, and that's farther than a lot of players get. But while Luka's been on the Dallas Mavericks roster, all I've heard is everyone else get blamed. Ownership. I've heard coaching get blamed. I've heard the roster get blamed. Not enough great guys around him. But you know what? Some of these guys are pretty good. Those are formidable names that I just named. And at some point, Luka does have to rise above it all. And he does have to elevate his team and his teammates, because I've seen other players do it. I've heard Luka compared to LeBron James because of his body type and his body type and his ability to, bully people with his weight inside of the paint. And sure, you can compare him to LeBron James, but you know what? LeBron does have postseason success, and he did have it relatively early in his career. And Stephen Curry, one of the other big stars in the league, from a shooting perspective, has success in the postseason early and late in his career. Someone who's a little bit more in the range, Giannis is a great young player that already has a championship. If you want to put Luka into the echelon of these players, I've got to see something. And all of those guys did not have perfect circumstances. Some of them had to rise above it all and elevate their teammates. And I haven't seen Luka do that. The biggest example, the names that I told you, was Jalen Brunson, who now, a year later, is a New York Knick and is succeeding in the biggest media market in the world with the most vicious journalists and newspaper writers out there. And he still is loved by that entire city, and he has shown through. And that $100 million contract has been justified. Why didn't we see that with Luka? And a couple weeks ago, Luka was telling a reporter, yeah, I do miss Jalen Brunson. And it's funny how Luka seems to miss all of these guys who leave the roster or who are no longer on the team when they're doing great and he's not doing great. And sure, maybe he's just trying to be a good teammate, trying to fill airspace and say something nice about a guy that he knows. But you know what? At some point, Luka does have to make it work with some of his teammates. And the fact that he didn't work with Kyrie Irving is an indictment on him. And I know Kyrie hasn't worked everywhere that he's been, but at some point, everyone else gets blamed. The teammates, the stars, the rest of the roster, the role play guys, the coaching, the ownership, but you're not as a star of the team. Last time I checked, the star gets all the credit when you win, and they do take some or potentially all of the blame when you lose. And for some reason, Luka has not been blamed as the reason why the Dallas Mavericks can't get farther. And I know he is the biggest part of their success in recent history, but he's not taking you all the way. And it's something to look at when you want to compare Luka to a Giannis, or you want to put him in the category with all these guys who are living legends, who are still in the league, who have postseason success when he doesn't. When he has 12 postseason wins, 12 playoff wins, a dozen, and he's got all these formidable teammates, and he hasn't been able to rise above it all. I know that LeBron James is a generational talent, arguably one of the greatest players of all time, but he carried a Cleveland team with literal nobodies. And that might seem harsh or offensive, but we all know what we saw. If we're going to compare Luka to these guys, at some point, he has to start taking the blame, and we have to stop looking at him with this glass of favoritism that it seems like everyone is looking at him through. No one is blaming him for their lack of success or their shortcomings, and you should be, because at a certain point, the star has to step up, and Luka Doncic has not. So this topic is one that I cannot wait to talk to our guest about, because I think he's going to have a really unique perspective on it. Over the weekend, I went to go see the movie Air with Matt Damon, Viola Davis, and Ben Affleck. And it was a great movie that was centered around how Nike had to pitch Michael Jordan all those years ago to become a Nike athlete, and how it forever changed how they were viewed. They are now one of the biggest, if not the biggest, powerhouses in the sport of basketball and in the sports and athletics world in general. And it was a great movie. I don't want to spoil anything, but once the credits started to roll, there was a clip that was played from Michael Jordan's real Hall of Fame speech. And he was addressing his mom and everything she'd done for him and how grateful he was to her. It was a very affectionate moment, a loving moment, and I enjoyed that. I mean, that shows you the human Michael Jordan in that moment, not the competitor, not the basketball player or the GOAT or the god that we all look to him as in the sports world. And I was walking out at that moment, and I thought to myself, you know what? Maybe Michael Jordan is the greatest player of all time. And some of you may be screaming at your screens right now, but I'm not a LeBron guy either. Truthfully, the GOAT debate is one that I have never been fully committed to either side on. And that might surprise a lot of people, because once I have an opinion, I'm definitely opinionated and I stick to it. My takes are not changing for the most part. And this is one that I've never been able to fully support either side on. And what bothers me, I think, the most about the GOAT debate is I don't think it's as far apart as people portray it to be. I think it's a lot closer than people think, especially, particularly when we talk about Michael Jordan's side of things. Everybody's like, oh, Michael Jordan wins this debate by a mile. He had the most had the 6 rings, and he was undefeated in the NBA Finals, and went 2 3-peats and all of this stuff. And truthfully, to me, it's not as close as, or it's not as far apart as people think it is. Because Michael Jordan, with all those great feats, needed the greatest coach of all time in Phil Jackson to help him succeed in the NBA and find postseason success. He needed the triangle offense. He needed Scottie Pippen. And before you say no, Michael Jordan had 1 win in the postseason without Scottie Pippen. So, yes, he needed him. That is a fact. Michael never had success without him. Never had true success. And while he was a great player, that postseason achievement, that postseason success never came to him without all these things going right. And, people now look at longevity and they say, well, of course LeBron's going to have the most points and the most assists and top 10 in postseason wins. He's been playing forever. And in Michael's time, people never looked down upon longevity the way that they do now. Same thing with Tom Brady. People say, oh, because of longevity, of course they're going to have all these stats. They weren't saying that back then. It was, if anyone ever got to play 15 years in the NBA or 20 years the way LeBron has, you would probably assume back then it would be someone who's broken down, who is coming off the bench, who is averaging 12 or 15 points a game, who is not really making an impact. He's just kind of waltzing his way to the finish line. No one would have ever thought that a guy like LeBron James would be as great as he is in year 20. That is unprecedented. We would have never expected that. But it's a reality. LeBron James is succeeding in the year 2023 in his 20th season in the NBA. And that matters. That should be factored into the debate and not in a negative way. And the way that people seem to think Michael Jordan was this, basketball god. I get it. He was great. I think he's one of the greatest players of all time. But I don't know that he runs away with the GOAT debate. Even if you told me Michael Jordan is the GOAT, I'd say, okay, I'm okay with that. That's fine. That is your perspective. I just don't think the debate is as far apart as people think it is. And, that's just kind of my takeaway from an excellent movie and another excellent reminder of just how impactful sports is beyond sports, in the business world, in the world of social justice as well, and everything else that sports has kind of poured itself into and into all the other avenues that it's found its impact felt. UFC 287 did not disappoint. It was in my own backyard in Miami, Florida. Great action, great main event, great co-main, and, couldn't have asked for anything more as a fan. It was a really exciting watch. And amongst some of the bigger storylines, George Masvidal retired, and to me, he had told people that he was going to retire if he lost this fight. He had said it on the Joe Rogan Experience, and I can't exactly take credit for this because I didn't say it on the broadcast, but I did tell friends of mine, look, Masvidal is not going to win this fight. He is too old. He is not better than Gilbert Burns at this stage in his career. Gilbert Burns is a killer. He's faced better competition. He's better on his feet, which is where George is going to want to make his impact felt. He was not going to outdo Gilbert Burns on his feet. It wasn't going to happen. And we know that Masvidal has had a bad experience with wrestlers over the past couple fights. This was not a good recipe for Masvidal to come out like the king of Miami. Maybe he did in our eyes as fans, but he wasn't going to win the fight. And so, credit to him. Thank you so much, George, for giving us so many great fights over the years. Really giving Miami someone to root for in combat sports. We didn't have a lot of people that we could wrap our arms around, and you certainly gave us that. So congratulations on an incredible career if you ever do see this. And best of luck to him. I know that he has a fight promotion that he is running as well. He's a pretty good promoter. He knows how to sell events and fights, so I'm sure he'll be successful in that space. But moving on to the real main event of the evening, Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira. This one to me means so much more to Izzy's legacy than people are letting on. And right now, Ariel Helwani is filming his show at noon, just as I'm doing my show. And I wonder what he's going to say about this, because I haven't spoken to him, and I haven't seen his clips yet. But to me, this is the most meaningful rivalry and the most meaningful series of bouts, or the most meaningful win and the most important one in Israel Adesanya's career. Because, last fight between Izzy and Alex, everyone kind of knew, there's a chance for a rematch here. If Pereira wins, then Izzy's going to get the immediate rematch. It's probably in the contract. There's a clause for it. Everyone knew going into this fight, UFC 287, this was for all the cards. It was for all the chips to go to the center of the board. Whoever won this, that's it. Alex was not going to get a rematch with Izzy if he lost. Izzy was not going to get a rematch with Alex if he lost. This was for it all. There was no take-backs. There was no rematch. There was no second opportunity. Or in this case, there was going to be no fifth opportunity to prove themselves. This was for all the cards, all the glory. And Izzy came out on top. And that matters, because in the fashion that he did it, and that emotional and very, impactful KO, that hammer fist at the end was personal. Alex was already out. Izzy he was taking out his anger at that point. And to me, what Israel Adesanya has proved to everyone is just how great he is. And this singular patch of fights, yes, it does push him to be one of the greatest UFC fighters of all time. And now you can definitely talk about him in that conversation, because prior to this, he had some boring fights, and some people thought that. And I understood why he did it. I didn't fault him for it. You saw it in the Usman fight with Leonard, with Leon Edwards a couple months back, their previous bout, not this past one, where you take risks towards the end of fights and you could lose it all. And Izzy was very careful not to do that over the past couple fights, and that's why people called him boring, and that's why this sequence of events with Alex Pereira and the UFC was so important and so fun to watch as a fan, because there was no safety net. There was no backup plan. There was no parachute. I mean, there was no turning back. And Izzy really put the pedal to the metal, and he showed everyone what he was made of. And to me, this does really throw Izzy into that conversation of, you know what? Maybe he is one of the greatest mixed martial artists of all time, certainly one of the greatest in the UFC. And this definitely catapults him into a conversation that I don't think too many people were having, or I don't think too many people gave credibility to is Izzy a GOAT of the sport? Is he a GOAT of the UFC? And I think at this point, it's finally fair to put him in that conversation. And it means so much more than anyone could imagine. And I think this was just it was so important for Izzy and his legacy. And it really does add another layer of greatness to everything that he's already achieved. I can't wait to see what's next for him. So one of the biggest stories in the NFL this past week was actually coming out of my own backyard. Tyreek Hill announced on his podcast that he would be retiring after 10 years in the NFL after the 2025 season, once his Dolphins contract was up. And it was one of the biggest conversations of the week. Everyone had a take on it, but I didn't quite hear this perspective on it. And I might be going into this a little bit too deeply or reading into this too much, but I think this is important, and I can't wait to ask our guest about it later on. To me, Tyreek Hill saying that he wants to retire or giving it a date and time, it's an indictment on Tua. If Tyreek Hill was still playing with Patrick Mahomes as his quarterback, or he was playing with one of the upper echelons of the quarterback position, like a Joe Burrow or a Josh Allen or a Justin Herbert, I don't think he is putting a timeline on his career or on his retirement. I think Tyreek Hill is subconsciously acknowledging here, hey, Tua is brittle. He is injury riddled. He is not going to play all this many games, and even if he does, he's not as great as some of these other guys are. To me, he's already limiting himself. He is putting a timeline on his amazing career, and I don't know. To me, I would not be saying that. Tyreek Hill would not be saying that if he thought Tua was a great quarterback who was going to be able to stand alongside the rest, who, even if healthy, was good enough to compete with these guys. I think subconsciously, I don't think Tyreek Hill did this to hurt Tua, but in his heart of hearts, I think he's letting you know his true feelings. Look, I don't look to Tua as a guy who can compete with the rest of these guys beyond 3 years from now, and that is an important thing to keep an eye out for. And to me, it is one of Tua's closest teammates acknowledging, you know what? This isn't all it seems to be, and I don't think we can win with this guy long term. Call me crazy, but that's what I take away from this. So last week, we started our first ever interview segment. We had some special guests on the show. Last week, it was Christian Ederson. He's a football player. He's a dual sport athlete. And he made a big announcement on the show. And luckily, some sports blogs, some sports writers picked up the story. So clearly, we're moving in the right direction. People are hearing this show, and we're getting our perspectives out on the biggest story. So that made me really happy to see. But this week, I knew that for the second interview, I wanted to have someone on who really had a feel for South Florida sports, because South Florida sports have been all the talk in the national realm for about the past month and a half. We've seen some big college stories, some big NFL stories, some big NBA stories. So I thought, who better to have on the show than the face of South Florida sports? So at this time, I'd like to welcome in Mr. Will Manso. He's the sports director at WPLG, and he's also a lifelong Giants fan and University of Miami graduate. Will, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Benjamin. Your intro is too kind, but I'm glad to be on the show. It's fun to chat some sports, and like you're right, it's been a crazy month or so.
It really has, and I want to get to the hottest story in South Florida sports, which is the Miami Heat. As we know, UD just retired. You kind of had the scoop on that. I saw your tweet telling people over the weekend, hey, make sure you're in your seats early because UD has a special announcement to make. So, you know, once again, one of those things where you really have been at the core of so many of these incredible, very important, groundbreaking stories in Miami. Tell me, the Miami Heat are going to be playing in the Tuesday play-in. What does this mean for them? It's tomorrow night. What can we expect as fans?
Well, look, it's kind of uncharted waters, right? The Heat have never been in a play-in game, and the play-in game's only been around a few years, but the Heat have only been in a position where they solidify a spot in this play-in game. So you take it as a new experience. The way the play-in works when you're the 7 or the 8 is it's not win or go home. If you win, you move on. If you lose, you still get another shot. But from a Heat perspective, they want to treat this as an all or nothing game. You don't want to have to force a second play-in on Friday. They play a Hawks team that they played well during the season, 3-1. They normally neutralized Trae Young, who's obviously a top 10 scorer in the league and one of the more dynamic players. Defensively, he's a challenge, but it's a challenge they've handled well in the past. So I think, Benjamin, the key for Tuesday is slow down Trae Young, get to your offense, let Jimmy be Jimmy, and I think the Heat will be moving on to the playoffs where they would face the Celtics next weekend if they do beat the Hawks Tuesday.
I heard you last night on the sports desk Sunday night with Clay, and you guys were chopping it up as usual. And you guys made a really good point, which is you don't think Jimmy Butler has played better basketball as a Miami Heat star than he is right now. Is he going to have to be the recipe to success on the offensive side of the floor? We know how much effort he puts in. We've seen the, countless pictures and the minutes throughout time and the graphics of Jimmy playing every single minute of the game. Is it going to have to be one of those performances from him?
I think so. And I think in a game like this, again, you got to treat it as a win or go home. Even though I know if you lose, you still get another one, you can't leave it up and you can't leave it to chance. And in a game like that, you need your stars to be stars. And right now, there are a few players in the NBA who have been bigger stars since the All-Star break than Jimmy Butler. I mean, Jimmy's been averaging 26 a game since the break. His efficiency numbers are off the charts. I mean, he's shooting over 60% from the field in that time, 85% from the line. He's getting to the free throw line. He's finishing. He's aggressive. He's hitting jumpers. He's hitting threes. The Heat are paying him to be the star. He's the face of the franchise, the guy who needs to carry them. You wish he had more help. Honestly, I think Heat fans know that. You wish that more guys would help up in big moments. But at this point, it's play your game, play defense, and then at the end have Jimmy be that superstar. And that's the formula for the Heat success. And it's not just Tuesday night, by the way. That's moving forward if they're going to get anywhere in these playoffs.
So realistically, what is a good expectation for the Miami Heat if they win this game? Can they make a run against some of these bigger teams like the Bucks, like the Celtics in the East, or is that going to be one of those that's a 7-game series and it's going to take them the entire series to win it all?
Yeah. Well, listen, the bottom line is get to 4 wins. So whether it takes 6 games, 7 games, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's going to be hard enough to beat a Celtics team that they'll likely play. Again, if they win Tuesday, they do play the Celtics. If they lose Tuesday and win Friday and get in the playoffs, they would then play the Bucks in the first round. So either way, it's going to be either Boston or Milwaukee in the first round. That's a game that you normally say to yourself for a series, that's who I want to face in the Eastern Conference Finals, not in the first round. It's going to be a huge challenge if they get through this because you have got to be on the road to start. They've got the home court. Milwaukee and Boston seem better equipped right now, better built to handle a long series. Over the course of the season, they were clearly the better team than the Heat. The Heat were middle of the pack. It's going to take a lot, and I can't sit here and tell you with a straight face that I think for sure the Heat will win because I don't. I don't know if the Heat have 4 wins in them against that kind of team. But I can tell you with a straight face that I think they believe they can, and they have the experience that leads them to think that they can kind of turn on this switch where they start playing the way they really wanted to play all season. Look, I will say this, Benjamin, as to be optimistic of the way they played. I mentioned Jimmy since the All-Star break. As a team, the Heat offensively have been in the top half of the league offensively as opposed to near the bottom in the first half. So they are trending in the right direction offensively. You hope that their defense will play well because that's a staple of Heat basketball. And then you say to yourself, why not? Let's keep games close and have a chance at the end. But it's going to be tough to win 4 games against a Boston or Milwaukee in a first-round series.
I appreciate the transparency. I totally get it. And I think, we can sit here and say all day, we're not sure if we believe, but what we've seen from history is if that team believes and if that locker room believes, the sky really is the limit for them with the amount of effort that they put in. So last question here about the Heat. We've seen them sign some contracts in the past couple of years that in retrospect, fans think are a little bit questionable. If this doesn't go the way they want it to over the next week or so, is the Kyle Lowry contract one that they revisit? Because I know that when they committed 3 years, $85 million to him, this is not what they had in mind. And it has been one of the underlying stories that, what happened to Kyle Lowry? We did not get what we thought. Is that something the Heat are going to be talking about this offseason?
I look at it this way. He's got 1 year left in his contract. So Kyle's going to be one of 2 things. Either he's going to help out in this playoff run. And oh, by the way, Kyle, since he's moved to the bench and came back from injury, he's been very good quietly. The Heat win games when he plays. The last 10, 11 games, you look at the record, I think they're 8-3 in the last 11 games that Kyle has played. they play better with him, especially coming off the bench. He's been hitting threes. He's been facilitating ball handling in key minutes down the stretch. Spo has used him wisely and smartly to keep him fresh for the playoffs. Again, he was dealing with that knee injury. He looked awful. He took that stretch off. He's looked a lot better. So I think short term, you need to see what Kyle can be in these playoffs. He's not the make or break reason why they will win a series against Boston or Milwaukee, but he certainly could be a big piece of pulling up an upset. I think long term, in the offseason, they have to revisit it in the sense of, do you want to use Kyle as an expiring contract, which is very attractive to other NBA teams, to facilitate some sort of trade to help you, and you move that contract and get something in return? Or either that or you get flexibility. But I do think that looking back, Kyle probably didn't have the impact. I think it's clear that the Heat hoped he'd wanted, whether it be injury, age, combination, whatever it may be. But they do have options in the offseason to figure out what they're going to do moving forward. He's got 1 year left on his contract. They'll figure it all out in the offseason.
That's interesting. So I now want to pivot over to the Miami Marlins, who, the biggest star on the team is Jazz Chisholm, and he was injured in one of the first games of the year, and now he's back. He was ejected over the weekend. There was a big storyline. What is a realistic expectation for the Marlins? We know that, fans aren't all in on them. They haven't been for years. The stadium attendance, that first game at Lone Depot Park after the Mets series was just downright awful. What is a realistic expectation in a league that, so many people are now interested in buying their way to a championship or into one of those later rounds? What can the Marlins realistically do with their roster?
I mean, look, they had an offseason to try to figure it out. I don't think they did it well. I've said all along, the offseason, this isn't just revisionist history. I mean, I don't think they have enough hitting. I think they need a big bat in the middle of the lineup. I love Jazz Chisholm. I do. I think he's a talent that's just going to keep getting better. He's got 30-30 potential. I love Luis Ariz, who they picked up in a trade. I thought that was a good first step to the offense. I love that move. Trading Pablo Lopez, give up your strength, right, and pitching to fix your weakness. That was the big step too. But they didn't go a step further and get that true slugger. And they need one. Jorge Soler is shown some pop early in the season, but he's not going to be that consistent guy. He needs that protection around him in the lineup from another bat. Avisel Garcia has been a massive disappointment. He's still struggling early in the season. I think when you look at this team, their pitching is excellent and can keep them in a lot of games, even through an awful start. The Marlins are last in the majors in runs scored. They're 4-6, which isn't good, but it's not. It should be much worse based on the fact that they can't score runs. They had a nice offensive explosion on Sunday to win a game and salvage a game in that Mets series. Maybe it builds them forward, but I still think the underlying issue with this team all season long is going to be the lack of offense. They will be in games, but God forbid that moment an injury hits in pitching and you've got it comes in a 162-game season, or offensively someone gets hurt. They just don't have bats. And unfortunately, Benjamin, they don't have bats in the minor league system that they can just call up and say, hey, we got a kid at AAA that's our big top prospect that can maybe help us. They don't have that right now. So it's a problem. Their offense is a problem. Their pitching is excellent. So you're going to see, I think, that's the storyline of the season.
Yeah, I mean, it's just awful. I feel like as bad as it's been and as bad as maybe it might seem now, I don't think we've seen the worst yet. And I totally agree with you. They weren't aggressive enough in the offseason to me. They didn't make a move for a batter. And even I saw on Barstool Sports, they wrote an article about how Jazz said, look, I'm not a cleanup hitter when he was bunting and there was that whole thing. So clearly there's some belief within the team, too, that they simply don't have enough. I want to move on now to the NFL and the Dolphins, because this was probably one of the biggest top 5 stories in football last week, maybe even top 2. Tyreek Hill in his own podcast said that he would like to get to year 10 in the NFL, and he'd like to retire after the 2025 season once his Dolphins contract is up. And I haven't even had a chance to explain my take on this on the show, but from my perspective, if Tyreek Hill's quarterback was still Patrick Mahomes, or if he was playing with one of these upper echelon guys like a Joe Burrow, like a Josh Allen, I don't think he'd be saying that. And to me, it is a little bit of an indictment on Tua and his play, and maybe not necessarily his play, I take that back, but, we've seen him get injured, and he's a smaller quarterback, and that doesn't bode well in the NFL, no matter what era we've seen these guys playing in. Even in an offensive-driven league, Tua just might be a little bit too small and a little bit too injury-riddled to really ever be a true full-time starter. And I think, to me, that was an indictment. Am I reading too much into that? Am I wrong? Or do you see some of what I'm saying there?
Look, you could absolutely give that opinion, and I'm sure others would agree with you. I don't necessarily agree with it only because I think Tyreek is looking at it from his perspective. And this is why I didn't make a big deal in my mind, even though you're right, it was a big story about the 3-year window. Because to me, even before Tyreek said that, to me, it is a Dolphins 3-year window to get to a Super Bowl because of Tua, but not for the reasons you mentioned of injury prone, which, by the way, are legitimate reasons. I mean, his injuries have to clear up. He has to prove he could stay healthy an entire season and play a full season. And that's obviously true. I mean, look, whether it be concussions or injuries he's had in the past, he needs to prove that he can be durable an entire season. That's the way you win a game. That's the way you win Super Bowls. That's the way you win in the playoffs. But I think in this story, that 3-year window is accurate because if Tua is the guy that the Dolphins have seen and can be that long-term, you got to pay him $50 million a year soon. His contract is going to be huge. Look at what quarterbacks are getting. I mean, Daniel Jones got $40 million, Derek Carr got a mid-upper 30s. If you're a star quarterback with the cap rising, you're going to get 45, 50 million plus. And when you commit that much to a quarterback, it shrinks what you could do in options of making additions. So I think the Dolphins are in the window now where because they're not paying Tua that kind of contract, they don't have to. They have a window to go out and get a Jalen Ramsey. They have a window to go out and get the players you've seen them get in the last year and acquire guys and make these moves that Chris Greer's made last year, trading for Bradley Chubb and making, signing the big contract. This is the Dolphins window, this 3-year window. If it goes beyond that, number one is Tyreek's going to be in his 30s. His game is speed and toughness. That goes away at some point. It's not like Tyreek's going to play till 35, 36 running at the speed he plays. So I have no problem with what he said. I think it's great that he looks toward his future, but I also think this 3-year window is the Dolphins window, regardless if Tyreek wants to keep on playing past year 10.
One of the last questions I want to ask you here. The Miami Hurricanes basketball. We saw on both the men's and the women's side just how big of a story they can be, just how good they can be. And I did this story about a couple weeks ago where I reevaluated my thoughts on the Miami Hurricanes, and I said, we love football down here, and we have a great tradition of it, especially, before my time. But I feel like the Miami Hurricanes are such a good cultural fit for basketball, and we're just seeing that now with NIL. With you want your players to have a little bit of flashiness to them. The Cavender twins are beautiful. They have a big brand. They also play relatively good basketball. Both the men's and the women's team have great coaching. NIL has boosted both rosters. Does it feel like maybe basketball is the thing that will restore sports glory to the Miami Hurricanes?
I mean, I think it has already, right? I mean, winning the ACC regular season, getting to the first Final Four in school history, that's big stuff. The Canes, think about it, in football, have never won the ACC. Never. That's crazy when you think about it, given the tradition. You mentioned being a young guy, and it's before your time, and it's true. That's the problem, is that look at the separation, entire generations. Here you are, a young guy, approaching college and all this stuff and starting your career and all these things, and you've never witnessed that Miami Hurricanes football greatness. That's an entire generation that Canes football has skipped. Now, look at the present. The generation currently that's getting basketball and Final Fours and Elite Eights and all these things that the men's team and the women's team this year was able to accomplish. So to your point, there is a shift there, and you hope football can catch up, because to me, it's not just basketball. To me, this is a prime spot for college athletes with the transfer portal and with NIL. Like, if you're a transfer, right, and you're like, I want to get one more good year, where should I go? Man, Miami's a good place to be for my senior year. Great weather, great place to be. I want to live in Miami and see what it's like, tradition as well. And then with the NIL aspect that Miami is heavily involved as far as a school that's appealing to those for NIL because of the brands, because of the ability to market yourself in South Florida, to me, that combination is perfect. Unfortunately, it's really only been basketball that's been able to capture that and grab it to their advantage. Football hasn't yet, and you hope that changes, because I think back to the time I was your age and all I cared about was Canes football and seeing the great teams. And man, it's been a long time since we've been able to see it again. An entire generation skip that hasn't had a chance to enjoy what that was all about.
I really do hope I can witness this at some point as well. I mean, I think about it all the time, and I think I'd have a tough time explaining to my kids how Miami sports don't get more free agents, how we don't get more recruits, how the Miami Marlins team with Christian Yelich and Stanton and loaded roster, and Jose Fernandez, who, rest in peace to him, was such a big part of that team, how these teams just never quite got rhythm, and they never made it all the way, and they never made these deep postseason runs. So I'm glad I witnessed LeBron. You were, of course, the face of that time and the best years of his career, so that was very fun. And that kind of leads me into my next segment here. So over the weekend, I went to go see Air with Matt Damon, Viola Davis, Ben Affleck, and it was a great movie.
I gotta check it out. I haven't seen it yet. I gotta check it out.
Yes, and I saw it, and just as I was walking out, they have great, of course, it's a calling card to the 80s. It's got great music, and they finish off with Michael Jordan's highlights and a Hall of Fame speech dedicated to his mother. And it was very emotional, and as people are walking out, I'm thinking to myself, man, I've always been one of those that I'm not locked in to a particular player in the NBA GOAT debate. I've kind of flipped back and forth over the years between LeBron and Michael Jordan, which is not like me when it comes to my takes, but I've never been able to stay all in with a particular take. And as we're walking out, an older gentleman looks to his friends and he said, oh, that's why Mike was the greatest. There'll never be another Michael. And that's where I was like, you know what? I walked out of this movie thinking maybe Michael Jordan was the GOAT. And then him saying that just kind of bothered me, because I think the problem with the GOAT debate is whichever side you're on, people act like it's so far apart. And it's one of our topics on today's show. Do you think the GOAT debate is a little bit closer than people let on? I mean, Michael Jordan did have the greatest coach in NBA history. He did only succeed with the triangle offense. He won a single playoff game without Scottie Pippen. There's all these things that make you think, you know what? Maybe the debate isn't as far apart as people think. Where do you stand on that?
It's funny. The GOAT debate is the hardest debate to have because you're comparing eras, and eras are so different. Basketball was different then. And it's so funny how you get a lot of people now and back in the day, basketball was different. They were tough and they pushed you around. And I get it. That's what I grew up watching. But the basketball of now, with the three-pointer and the advancement of nutrition and the shape these guys are in, is also appealing to me. So it's hard to gauge because you don't know what LeBron would have been in that era, vice versa, Michael Jordan in this era. They would have been great, but obviously circumstances are a big part of success. LeBron didn't have team success, right, until he got to Miami. He carried Cleveland teams, right? They could never finish the job. What did it take? Coming to a structure and a situation where you were able to use his greatness with others, Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh, Pat Riley, Eric Spoelstra, to win championships. And then LeBron used that to feed into the next opportunities. So I think the GOAT debate is a hard one to have because of the situation and eras and the difference in the sport, the way it changes. To me, if you tell me Michael Jordan is the greatest, I say you're right. If you tell me LeBron is the greatest, I say you're right, because they're all in the same category of greatness to me. They are players that rose above all the circumstances, the biggest of moments, to have huge games and huge moments and defining moments in sports. They came differently, as you mentioned. They came, with teammates' help as well. You can't do it all alone. But Michael Jordan's probably the greatest based on his career and never losing in the finals and all those things. But LeBron is the most skilled, talented, multi-purpose, just intelligent basketball player I've ever seen. So you can pair it however you want. And by the way, we haven't even mentioned Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Bill Russell, because again, in those eras, Bill Russell was a unicorn in his era, what he was able to do and the way he changed defense in the NBA. So these discussions are hard to have because every era has greatness and they're all different.
Last thing here that I do want to ask you, more your perspective on it. You were the face, to me, and to so many other South Floridians, you were the face of one of the most magical times in Miami Heat history. It felt like you had the scoop with LeBron. It felt like you had the interviews, like you had the best takes. And I know you may be laughing behind your screen right now, but I really do think that a lot of people think that's true. Was that a magical time? Did you appreciate it when you were going through it? And do you think Miami will ever see anything like that again?
Well, first of all, I appreciate it. That's way too kind. I mean, I think I was blessed, like a lot of people, that timing is everything, right? That I was able to cover that team for 4 years. And I think everyone who did, from Jason Jackson, who was heavily involved in being in those games and interview those guys and the video bombs and all that stuff they used to do, to all the local reporters and national guys that went along the way and the people that covered it. It was a time that you look back and say, no, I don't think I'll ever see anything like that. Benjamin, it was the easiest way to put it is it was a rock concert every night. It was a traveling circus. It was like watching the Beatles or the Rolling Stones every night. It was like watching, the debut of Hamilton every night. It was like every night it was a massive production. Every town they went to, it was the biggest story. Every game they played, everybody was live and reporting on it. Every day, LeBron and Dwayne and Chris would talk. I look back and I saw those 4 years I may be off a game or two, but it's about 82 playoff games the Heat played in those 4 years, 4 finals runs, 2 championships. That's the equivalent of an entire regular season in just playoff games. And I was lucky enough to attend every single one. So when I look back at that era, no, there'll never be anything like that. I can't even begin. I've even had this discussion. I remember Bam a couple of years ago. We were talking about, those teams, because Bam obviously being a young guy. And he asked me what that was like. And I said, Bam, you'll never truly understand it unless you were there. I could tell you stories all day, but it was just a different time. And it was the first time we saw it. And I don't think we'll ever see anything like that again.
Will, I appreciate your time. I think everyone appreciates you and what you've brought here to South Florida sports. You make it feel like a big market, even when these teams aren't playing up to standard. I super appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time. And we'll have to have you back on another time, but we really appreciate this conversation today.
I always appreciate it, man. Anytime you need me on, just give me a call.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Will. We'll see you next time.
You got it.
That's all for today's show. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Will Manso. He had a great perspective on so many interesting stories. I hope you enjoyed my take on some of the biggest stories in sports this week. Until next time, until next week, this is the Benjamin Cure Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you next time.